I think what the market really needs to know, the real bottleneck is going to be and is drawing the fiber itself, actually making the fiber.
So we came up with a solution to offer trunks with higher fiber count MTPs per MTP, essentially doubling the capacity.
We really want to just talk again about, supply chain, some of the issues out there, some of the myths, and kind of bring the reality of the situation to the people in the enterprise space, which we, service, and most of our customers are all in the enterprise space. And I see it as twofold. Obviously, there's the big data center hype right out there, Kenny, where everybody's data center, AI. I think Elon Musk in court fighting open AI today. So a lot of
He
activity
is.
and it's always in the news. And, there's the other side of it, which is, in the enterprise space where we have customers that are higher education or pharmaceuticals or, large campuses and office buildings. So those are the two main areas, that we service. And they are reacting quite differently. The office space, as you know, when we talked last time, is really coming back in New York City. But what we're really seeing is that people have to start thinking differently about the office space, and very important that you look at it like an edge data center, that they want all the data that's in that office space. It's got to be collected. It's got to go over the network. They need, as little latency as possible. They need to be interconnected to everything, including those data centers in some fashion. And I bring this up because I think part of the hype out there that we're seeing is, the data center market is so capitalized, but what they're doing is they're parlaying bids on properties to build these data centers. Some companies are doing 3 for the same project, some are doing 6 for the same project, and they're just going to pick the land that comes the most available at the cheapest cost with the utilities that they need and can get the approvals from the communities that they can be in those places. And we've heard in the news that these places are starting to get knocked down. So they're just kind of spinning the wheel, hoping they get their land. So the demand could look more than it is, especially for the hyperscalers. But the hyperscalers are a problem when it comes to getting fiber and power and land, etc. And fiber specifically, high fiber count, ribbon fiber to be specifically, is what the hyperscalers are using. And that is not our typical product offering for the enterprise space in probably 80-90% of the cases. So with that said, Kenny, I really want to just kind of, you handle a lot of large financial institutions. You handle a lot of the people that need, zero latency. Not only that, but they are starting to look more and more in the data center space, kind of like mini hyperscalers. The density of the fibers. I think last I heard, there's 200,000 fibers in one rack for, an NVIDIA setup, on a high power rack. So we're really looking at, multiple things, but give us an idea from your perspective how you see that rolling down, in the enterprise space. Because we could talk about the hyperscalers, but the reality is, how do we service our enterprise customers, and how do we mitigate through the supply chain of those products that they need, and give them the confidence level that, there are two markets, and there are two markets being served and by different products. So give us a little insight, how you see that.
Yeah, so to your point, the customers that we're dealing with on the enterprise side are, the scale at which they're deploying now would be something that we would have thought would have been very hyperscale like, a few years ago. So, definitely kind of maybe falling in that neo cloud, in between enterprise and hyperscale. But even traditional enterprise customers for us are growing out, are building out, I should say, at scales that are much bigger in the past. So I think I would kind of add on to what you had mentioned, right? Where, people have seen the announcements from Corning, whether that is the Meta deal, which was a $6 billion commitment, and immediately thinking that that's going to affect, you know, their enterprise builds, which it really isn't, because as you said, we're, those cables are really being used for uh, the hyperscale projects, right? And in cases where we did have ribbon cable, we've got alternates that we're actively working with people on, so it's not affecting the build cycles, I would say. But the really the key has become, and I think we started communicating this earlier on in the process, is that we're really getting and have gotten folks to do much more forecasting than they did in the past,
Mhm.
kind of giving us dates that we need to back into. And that's a combination of the enterprise community. I'm sorry, the end user community, the consulting firms or engineering firms that we work with, and really the distribution partners to make sure that they're prepared and they're help supporting this with inventory, right? So it's become a uh, much more, uh, many more conversations
Mhm.
about planning much further in advance, is specifically on fiber. I think Corny's done a great job of adding capacity, so it does help, but planning is key so that we can do our best to make sure that we're making our customers' deployment successful. So I think again, the communication is the key, where we're leveraging our partnerships, longstanding partnerships over the years, and is doing much more planning further in advance than we would have typically had to do in the past. One, because we do have to make sure that we can deliver on time, right? There is a lot of fiber needed, but again, the scale of the projects are much bigger than they would have been in the past, um, especially on the data center side, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're correct. I kind of see it, forking into kind of the macro and the micro, even within the enterprise space, right? Because, the macro look is, like you said, there's panic. The ribbon fiber is really what's concerning. It's not to concern, them and with their builds. But, the micro thing that's happening is as they are accelerating to increase their builds, their fiber requirements are going up. So, I think what the market really needs to know, the real bottleneck is going to be and is drawing the fiber itself, actually making the fiber, because that's one of the most sophisticated plants to build. They're building, expansion plants. Everybody's in the business of cabling. You could get cablers, you can get cabling machines, you can, expand, you can, Corning in a lot of cases are converting their factories, from one manufacturing type to another and expanding those. So, they feel confident that they can keep up with that, but it's the fiber drawing, and that's got a very limited capacity worldwide. And they say that really won't be into play till, sometime in 2028, where some of these things could come online to relieve that. But with that said, when I say macro and micro, the macro is how do you service the customer or the market, etc. Again, the micro is how are we dealing with that behind the scenes? And we'd agreed on the last podcast that, right, you want it when, I still have people call up, they need it in 10 days, 5 days. And, planning is key, right? And they're forcing people to plan more. But on the sidelines, what Corning is actually doing and ourselves working, and this is where I think it really matters in the supply chain. And what we're saying is the more we can partner with our vendors and partner with the communities in which we serve, the better we can serve it. And as opposed to, just bidding it out, go to three bidders and hoping somebody could supply it. And I think that's a high risk game today. I think what really has to happen is the coordination and take distribution, for example. I was actually, quite pleased at the inventories they're, carrying now. You know, People like, Wesco, Gray Bar, Accutech, our main distributors, even regional distributors are increasing their inventory. And I look at, because fiber drawing is a problem, what we're doing is allocating that to distribution. They probably have more loose tube outside plant cable for enterprise opportunities and customers and serviceability and deliveries than I think they've ever carried, right? I mean, you've been looking at some of those inventories now yourself, and
Sure.
you've been working with
But
distribution.
I think it's like the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come, right? It's if you stock it, you will sell it.
Right.
For sure, right? If the inventory is there, then we obviously have the ability to direct our customers towards our distribution partners to make sure that that they can get what they need when they need it.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I have past experience having been with distribution with GE Supply Company. Um, and I remember those days where, if you had it, you sold it, right? And people, you know, charge a higher price if they don't have it. They got to ship it, find it, you got to wait for it. And I saw over the years before this, before COVID actually, that, distribution was getting tight on inventories, because it's dollars carried on inventory, and it looked like people could do just-in-time manufacturing. So I saw the market actually go the other way, with inventories. And like you said, you can't sell it if you don't have it. And then if you get crunched or you have a supply chain issue, um, not only are you a consistent buyer and supplier of it, but you might have lost your place in line with the manufacturers as far as who gets it and how much it's going to be allocated. So I think all in all, our ecosystem is quite strong in that sense. And I don't know what the dollar number is, but it's hundreds of millions of dollars that these distributors I mentioned are carrying, in just Corning product on the shelf. So if you're ready to build something tomorrow, it can be done, and you can go pick it up. If you needed something custom, I think we're in a 2 to 4 week time period, which quite honestly is very good in today's market. But we know, and Corning knows, and Eaton knows, and our manufacturers that we represent know that the closer I get, to 2 weeks and under, the better it is, and everybody loves it. But with today's constraints, that's gonna happen for a while if you're not planning and you don't have, you know, that affordability to take those risks and say, oh, I think I could find somebody and get it in 2 weeks and at the price I want, etc. So I think we've seen a lot of that, and we've seen a lot of people out there, again, LinkedIn, social media. We got to be careful, because just like when I go on and look at the news and what's happening in the world, I don't know what's true or not true. So, my strongest message I can give to people out there is, don't believe everything you read or hear, and everything is very verifiable, and not by Chat GPT, because they don't always know, or Gemini or Glock or whatever one you're using. It's been known they don't know, those type of situations. I think the interaction and the ability to stay in touch with the customers and keep communicating and working behind the scenes with our suppliers. And we even work behind the scenes with the contractors. I think you had one job that you were doing where, it had to happen fast, and, we had to fly people to Austin, and they're, trying new technologies and new architectures for the fiber infrastructure. But, talk to us a little bit about that, and kind of how, you know, without giving the name away, you know, what they were trying to do, and why was that different, and why was that a good result at the end?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that we're seeing is excuse me, an obviously an increased density demand, right, across the board. So,
Yeah, give us an
uh,
idea when you say increased density. Give the audience kind of a feel for that a little
well,
bit.
so you hear a lot about GPUs, obviously, and how much fiber a GPU will take, which again could be thousands of strands going into a cabinet or tens of thousands of strands. But even again, when we talk about some of our larger enterprise customers, real estate is key. They're always trying to, I mean, if you think about customers taking space in a cage within a data center, right? The more space they take or the more power they use, obviously that's more money that they're paying. So if they're paying for a certain amount of space, then the more the more strands that they can deploy within that space, then the better it is for them, um, to decrease footprint or limit footprint if possible. So, customers are always trying to find ways to get more into a housing or a cabinet than they could. So we came up with a solution to offer trunks with higher fiber count MTPs per MTP, essentially doubling the capacity in a housing in the same footprint that they would typically get, and then breaking it out from there into uh, you know QSFP transceivers. So it was a good scenario as far as being able to provide a solution, which was
Hey,
not
Kenny,
custom but
no,
not
it's a
fully commercial.
question for you.
Sure.
Again, to kind of give the audience a perception of, perspective. If we, again, you talk about real estate, right? If we have one rack, which used to be 10 kV, now going to a megawatt, the power that rack needs is unbelievable. So not just the square footage, but the square inch matters, because you got to house all this equipment in there, and that's not even counting the servers and the fiber and everything else that's going on in there, right? So now we
Mm-hmm.
look at one rack unit, which is 1.75 inches. They measure every rack unit, and they always have. But a typical box for fiber in a data center is 4U, right? And we used to, say, oh my gosh, we went from 288 fibers and doubled the capacity to 576. But now with an MTP, full MTP canister for you, I forgot the exact number, but it's thousands of strands. So you're telling me
I'm
now
trying to
that
do
we
the
want,
math.
huh? But now you're
I'm
telling
trying to
me,
do the math
yeah,
now.
right? But I think I figured out it's like 3,700 and something fibers. But now you were saying that you're doubling that and even going beyond that. So just to give you an idea out there, we're talking about, you know, going from, 144 and for you maybe 20 years ago to now they want thousands and thousands in that same space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then
So
gives an idea how
you
they're
have to think of it if
achieving that.
it's. I was gonna say if you think of it, it's LC connectivity. It's 576 fibers in a 4U.
Right,
But
right.
if you now go to uh, MTP connectivity, you're looking at least 4 times that much. And in this instance, we were able to give them 8 times that much because of the connectivity that we were using. So, that's not even getting into the scenarios where we start looking at MMC connectors, which will increase that density, even more. That's very GPU based. But again, even in our traditional enterprise customers, we are still seeing some of these density requirements. So to kind of jump into what that means now on the Eaton side, right? Again, all that has to be cooled and powered. So in cases before where we would have had one PDU in a rack or two PDUs in a rack. Now we're looking at four PDUs in a rack um, to provide a tremendous amount of power to all of those devices that have to be
And,
fed, right?
and higher
Now,
power per PDU as well, right?
correct. I mean, we've got PDUs that have been launched already that are 100 amps, 140 amps, uh, where is literally a breaker per every outlet to be able to deliver the amount of power that needs to be used, right? So now we start looking at cabinets or enclosures that are even getting deeper, right? So you go from a 48 deep cabinet to a 54 deep cabinet or horizontal PDUs, so you're not taking up space in the back of the cabinet. I mean, it's a cascading effect when you look at how all of these things are intertwined and what it means for the different components that even just that we sell into the data center also. So
Yeah,
again, and then to kind of look at it from the cooling perspective, right? So it's no surprise that Eaton went out and acquired Boyd, which is liquid cooling and direct to chip and manifolds and CPUs and or CDUs rather. Uh, so again, just
yeah,
a, a continuation of what this means, in this world. I mean, on top of that, we're seeing even cases where maybe a little bit of a different scenario, but an IDF now that has to have a certain amount of equipment or an MDF, where some of the buildings that our customers are deploying they're not new. So to
right.
bring in, whether it's new or not new, but to bring in HVAC or that sort of thing into the IDFs, it's quite expensive, right? So now Eaton has a portfolio of cabinets that are self-contained units that are cooled to not, so now you don't have to bring HVAC or crack
Right.
units
Crack
into
units, yeah.
the IDF, right? So
Yeah, it's interesting as you're talking, I'm thinking about a lot of things. The theme is obviously supply chain, right?
mhm,
But two things come to mind as we talk, and one is that, there's also technology changes, right? Disruptive technology changes. Um, and those things are needed to be mitigated through because everybody wants to be bleeding edge, especially if you're in the financial sectors or low latency trading, any of these type of things. They like to be on the bleeding edge, but they want to minimize the risk. And people have to remember when you talk about things that you want, there's a whole other things that change. So take for example, we have now this multi-core fiber that Corning came out with. So we were talking about, over, 3,000 strands in that box with MTPs, but, and then you put MMCs, you could double that again, but then put in, multi-core where it has 4 cores per fiber. Now I'm quadrupling, the actual number of light pathways I have to communicate. Um, Now that goes with everything changes, right? uh, my trunks, my termination points, my connection points, right? I've got these multi-core fibers, the assemblies, the harnesses, patch cords. This is a whole different animal. It's not a single fiber cable anymore. Same thing with hollow cores out there being talked about. I can't tell you how many calls I got from the banks that they want to learn, and we have, you know, get on Zoom calls and we give presentations on hollow core fiber, and it sounds great, but is it deployable yet? Does it make sense? Because now, they don't even have, the ends of, they have the fiber, but now how do you terminate it? How do you terminate hollow core? So there's not a, shall we say, a way to get there with product available on market yet, right?
Yeah, and I think hollow core is going to have applications that are going to be a little bit more limited,
Specific.
right? Certain specific use cases where that's going to be deployed. Um,
Yeah,
the
correct.
the multi-core is really, when that is really fully available. I mean, Corning does have a solution
Yes,
in terms of general
exactly.
availability, right? When that
Right,
becomes
right,
available,
right.
that's where I think we're going to see, even again in the past couple of years, where we would have said, our enterprise customers wouldn't be building at the rate that they're building at now. I think that how multi-core is going to be the same type of thing. It's not
Yeah,
going to be for everybody right now, but the percentage of customers that are going
no,
to be looking at that solution and deploying it, I think is
uh,
going to
no,
be
no,
like
you're
a
exactly,
hockey stick.
yeah, you're exactly right. I think you're right to mention the fact that multi-core is available as a solution. Hollow core, maybe not so much at this time. But again, I think the driving point is the supply chain. The customer's trying to go bleeding edge. They hear things they may not know about it. So education is a big part of our process with partnering with our customers, right? They depend on us to be the experts and steer them the right way. So it's good that we're communicating with them. But I'm just saying the market at large, people we don't get to talk to are, chasing sometimes things that are either not available, and you could spend a lot of time trying to, work or research something if you don't know, right? So the question is, who do you know that you can depend on to get that answer and get it quickly? So this is the whole supply chain. This is part of the whole supply chain issue, right? So if you talk about today with your data center that we had to, fly to Austin and help assist on the new upgrade on that stuff, it's a proven solution. Um, but again, they had to work with you very closely, right? The lead times of all those products, and wouldn't you agree you know, um, and I know you know this customer good, but I think that wouldn't you agree that they were much more patient than usual? If we took, 15 years ago, that same customer, maybe they wouldn't be so patient, right? But today they understand the dynamics of what we live in. We've educated it on that. We are able to,
Mm-hmm.
talk to them and say, you really have to plan this out. The trunks are going to take this long to build, the rest of these parts. This is an inventory. This is not. You want them custom, custom harnesses. Um, we do troubleshooting as you deploy them for your first one. We make sure we have field techs on there. So this whole process, would you say, is, you know, much longer and much more involved as far as collaboration.
Without a doubt. And I think part of this is the technology, right? Um, Growing, right?
Hmm.
Struggling to think of the word, but technology advancements, right? But at the same time, I think the pandemic helped recalibrate maybe the mindsets of our
Yeah,
customers, and I think part of this is because of that. The things that they dealt with from a supply chain perspective, that uh, there's much more planning that goes into it, right? Than there was in the past. So I think that that's all part of what's happened over the last 5 or 6 years, has gotten us to this point, um, where they're sitting down having those conversations earlier on than they were in the past. Um,
yeah,
so it, I do, as you were mentioning something earlier, we start talking about MMC connectors or even outside of multi-core, because that adds a whole other level of density, right? But when we start talking about an MMC, I think one of the conversations that I've been having quite a bit lately is if you have a infrastructure in place, which is essentially Edge8,
Mm,
which many of our customers are using. The largest percentage of our data center customers are using Edge8, right? So 8 fiber MTP as opposed to a
correct.
12 fiber MTP. Again, all of these iterations of transceivers that are coming down the line, it's an easy transition from Edge8 to whatever that last mile is. I think I mentioned this last week in the podcast, but I think it definitely bears repeating, right? So
Right.
whatever type of uh, if you're coming off of that with LC connectivity today, that's fine. But if at least you have that infrastructure in place, and you'll have to run more infrastructure later, but whatever you have in place easily transitions in that last harness or jumper or whatever it is into whatever the transceiver that's going to come down the line next. So I think that's the message that I continue to deliver and have those conversations with customers to kind of set them at ease that they're at least what they're doing today won't have to be ripped and replaced
Right.
for future generations of electronics, which is key.
Yeah. It's changing and it's changing fast. So, in closing, as we come to the end of this podcast, Kenny, give us, you know, what would your advisement to, the market at large, especially the end user customer, as far as the success of, deploying these projects as they relate to, fiber power and cooling? What would be your message on
I planning is the number one thing, and as early on as you can have those conversations and we can have those conversations, then it just increases our chance for success and having product on site when their deployment takes place. But I would also say that as you're planning these projects, sitting down and talking through a roadmap of what is coming, right? So that you're not just deploying a project today and then moving on to the next project, right? You're kind of implementing a standardization or a solution across, multiple projects that will help you down the line, right? So it's, we're dealing with a design for one project, but you know that you're going to set yourself up for success down the line. As far as from a power perspective, and again, uh, I think we're unless it is an existing site, we're looking at 415. We do have solutions obviously for 208, but 415. What is coming down the line, and what understanding that also because again the power may change, but at least again you're putting in an infrastructure in place that's going to support multiple iterations of electronics as well. So again, just I think it's all part of an umbrella of planning as far in advance as possible, um, and engaging with us to again make sure that we've got all the partners in place, and everybody's singing from the same sheet of music, and that
Yeah.
we can
Yeah. I
deliver
think that's,
what's needed when it's needed.
no, I think that's well said and good summarization. And I think the two closing points I would say that you brought up is the standardization, right? So if you look at, you know, 415 and busway systems and Edge8 solutions, then across all platforms, that'll work for many, many years through many, many technology upgrades. And, that one comes off the punch list as far as what do I do? What do I worry about? And the more you can do that in building your systems, the easier it will be. So that's a great way to end it. So that's all we got for you folks this time. So stay tuned for our next one, and we appreciate any time that you listened or put into this. Hopefully, we make the content something that sticks and is worth it for you. So again, any opinions, suggestions, or constructive ideas, they're more than welcome. So thank you, and until next time.
Well said.
Thank you. All right.